welcome to the City of Charlotte's first meeting to discuss the work that we have done in committees. And so with that, I'd like to call this meeting to order. And let's begin with our introductions. And we will start with our city attorney.
Good evening, Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Tar Picard, District 6.
Ed Driggs, District 7.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Phi Lyles, Mayor.
Braxton Winston, Mayor Pro Tem.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
James Mitchell at large.
Good evening, Marjorie Molina, District 5.
Philly Collins, Deputy City Clerk.
All right, thank you everyone for that. This is the time that we spend the day working through committee assignments, referrals, discussions, and report out so that we can affirm the things that the committee recommends or have a discussion and then determine if the committee's work is acceptable to the full council. And so we usually begin with our first committee meeting that's held in the morning, and I would like to ask us to begin with the report out for transportation, planning, and development. And the chair is District 7 Representative Ed Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. So we did meet this morning. The committee members are myself, Ms. Anderson as Vice Chair, Ms. Johnson, I missed one. We have 5, right?
Mr. Graham?
Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell.
And Mr. Graham. We had one agenda item today. We talked about the CTC, the Transportation Center, and basically received some information from staff about basically the transit aspects of this proposed development of the CTC. So the conversation revolved around bus service levels, whether they would be maintained or changed as a result of the transition to the new facility, and in particular, the temporary facility that will be created next door to accommodate the buses during the time construction goes on for the new facility. We looked at the financial structure, and we also had a conversation about the businesses that are currently in the transportation center and what provision might be made for them to also be able to conduct business at the temporary facility and or the new facility. At the end of the discussion, the committee voted unanimously to recommend to the full council that we basically proceed with this project toward an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, which would not be binding and would subsequently lead to an actual binding contract that we would be able to consider as a council after that. So that's basically my report. I don't know if another committee member has anything to add. Mr. Graham, you were there. Is that okay?
Job well done.
All right, so that's it from me.
Any discussion or questions from members of the council regarding the report?
We will hear also from economic development, since it was an agenda item there as well.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say that in the Metropolitan Transit group also voted to support it unanimously with the 7 voting members, including the county and the 6 towns. I do want to acknowledge the comments that were made in that meeting, particularly around the idea that what people see is this underground, and air quality was something, and I'm glad to see that the environmental process is in our next steps to make sure that the climate control is appropriate as well. And then there's this idea that people of color might be sent to a place that they're being hidden. I challenge that a little bit in the respect that I think having a safe and reliable system is what we want for everyone in our community, but particularly for those that cannot afford to have a car or have to use bus service for work or grocery shopping. And so I know that we often talk about being seen or that we see people, but I believe that a good design is possible so that people can have a really safe and reliable place where they can take the bus. So I just wanted to mention, but I want you to know that those were the 2 concerns expressed. I also want you to know that the transit advisory riders had a split vote, 4-4, the recommendation that we have on the table today and 2 against. So it was an interesting thing. The staff gave them the same reports that you've seen as a council, and they had the same opportunity to have that discussion as well. So with that.
Mayor,
I
I should
had
mention
Mr.
that we previously, I just wanted, in response to what you said, mention that we had previously considered in committee the question of the design, and so all the discussion around the safety issues and the other pros and cons had been addressed. I don't want it to appear that we didn't think about them, but that was
Oh, no.
something that we had looked at and decided on, and able to allow that part of the process to proceed. And today, 2 committees worked on the remainder of the P3 project.
Well, as
Thank
I
you.
said, the MTC meeting was unanimously to support the design that you're recommending.
Yes.
And the work that's going to take the next steps, but I just
Right.
wanted to mention that. All right, Mr. Mitchell?
Mayor, the only thing I would add to our great discussion this morning was the fact we raised the kind of issue to be sensitive to the businesses that are there now. And I think Jacob was going to give us information who they were, that when the new development come back on board, that they have the opportunity to move back in. I think, when people are there, when it's not good, we definitely should give them the opportunity when it's new clientele. It'll be the shiny penny in Charlotte to allow those small businesses to come back and first refusal or whatever, but to be sensitive to that. So
Okay.
we did raise that in committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions for the committee? So, Mr. Driggs, anything, do you expect this to come forward in a month or 3 months? What's the,
I don't think we have much of a pipeline now. We have a lot of follow-up work to do on the transportation plan, as I think was apparent from our retreat. I don't believe we have pending referrals right now. And Mayor, I think I should mention also, during the committee meeting we received with the bus drivers, so the company that we retain to manage our bus driving system, finally, after, long months, as you know, of negotiation, has now completed a new contract. And I think that's important because it clears the way for us to make progress on a lot of the other issues facing our buses.
thank you very much for that report. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. As part of that discussion or presentation, Mr. Cagle mentioned that there is going to be an RFP out on the street in the coming weeks, months, if not weeks, around a future contract for the bus management organization. In some of the conversations that we've had over the past year, this current and the past council, there were some certain desires to possibly look at what council's expectations are as it relates to future operators, future operation of the bus system, excuse me. For instance, there was a conversation about whether or not the management organization should come and talk to council every so often. So, potentially, I think colleagues, I think we should consider, is there a policy question here that we want to deal with as it relates to future selection of and approval of that contract?
I think that one of the things that I would raise is the governmental structure for the MTC and what that means. It would be great, Mr. Baker, if the CAT's attorney could review that document and tell us what's in it, what our roles are, to clarify that so that we're all on the same page. That would be very helpful, I think.
Yeah, Mayor, you bring up a good point. Also, in these kind of public community dialogues we've been having, that structure did come up. So how do we not work necessarily work in a silo as we're thinking about this, but how do we work with the MTC and the representative towns that are on that to, again, have a better kind of balance around where our community or regional priorities around those operations.
I think it's always good for us to start off on the same platform. So if we can get something from the city attorney that explains what the roles and what the agreements currently say, because certainly there are 8 voting members representing a number of folks, and It's important because one of the issues that we perhaps have done in the past is not paid enough attention to those groups that work with us to make it possible. So with that, thank you. Hearing no further discussion on transportation, we will go now to the Budget, Governance, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and Ms. Ajmera is here. I hope everything's good. All right, Ms. Ajmera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So first, I just want to acknowledge our committee members. First, let me start with recognizing our Vice Chair, Mr. Mitchell, who will be holding the fort down while I'm on maternity leave. And we have committee members, Ms. Anderson, Mr. Bukhari, and Ms. Mayfield. So we had 3 items on our agenda today. So at your table, you should all have this copy of federal and state legislative agenda, and that was adopted by the committee today. And you will note in this one, the only 2 items that I do want to highlight is the committee decided to add 2 items. One was pretrial services, and that was something requested by our CMPD chief. And second is homestead tax exemption. This is in alignment with Mecklenburg County. So we are working and collaborating with the county to ensure that we can provide our seniors, so that our seniors can continue to age in place. So those are the 2 new items that were added to our state legislative agenda. And the other item that was the topic of discussion was the mobility. So around mobility, you will see at your table, there is a language there. The only change to that language is request to authorize under mobility in the first bullet point. So instead of saying, so you will see under mobility, right after Mecklenburg County, we are asking for that request to authorize the county commission. So that's the only change. But language that we presented on at our January 3rd strategy session was reaffirmed by our committee today. So there are no other changes to our state and legislative agenda other than the ones I went over. So any questions, concerns on this topic before I give an update on the second one?
Any questions? All right. I don't think we have any comments or any questions.
Okay, so well, if not, I just want to give you all a heads up that other thing I do want to highlight is Mr. Bukhari was in support of the committee's process and the protocols. However, he did not recommend the mobility language as is that is proposed by the committee.
Same here.
I'm just talking about the committee. So I just want to give you a heads up. So tonight we would just like to get consensus on our legislative agenda language, and the next step is going to be at our February 13th business meeting, we will have this formal adoption on our agenda. So committee members, feel free to chime in on our state and federal legislative agenda. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor, Ms. Johnson has a question.
All right, Ms. Johnson? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask about our state legislative agenda. One of the things we talked about in the Great Neighborhoods Committee meeting today is inclusionary zoning. So I know that it might be too late for this legislative agenda, or I don't know if it is or not, but we were told by by Councilmember Bakari that it's kind of a non-starter from the general legislation. However, since I've been on council, we know that possibly could be a solution. and we've never broached it as a council. So I'd like to discuss it on why we haven't discussed it. And maybe from our attorney, if you could come back with some information about it, I think that would be nice. From what I read, Chapel Hill is doing something like that. Chapel Hill's doing something like that, and I don't know if it's a conservative approach that we are taking. I'm not sure why we're not, but this could be an opportunity
done.
for us to begin to build our way out of this crisis. So inclusionary zoning is where part of the development in the city, and we've had quite an influx, a portion of that will be required to be affordable or an affordable rate. So it's something I think that our voters would like to see and they ask about. So I want to know why we are not at least discussing it or advocating for it. Thank you.
I see Mr. Fenton.
Well, I want to talk to our lawyer because if I recall, and I might not recall this as well as I need to, but we have some authority for inclusionary zoning now that Anthony Fox, when he was mayor, they adopted. But I think the real question is to our attorney to tell us what that is and what it isn't, because I don't know what Chapel Hill has done, but I do, and I don't recall really what we have done, so it would be good to get some information to see what these methods are, and even other places in North Carolina to have a little bit more understanding. So, Mr. Baker, I know we're asking, but I think we ought to find out what we currently have, and then look and see what Chapel Hill has, and if there's anyone else in the state that's been able to get that legislation. Would that be, Ms. Johnson, will that work for you? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
I had Mayor Pro Tem followed by Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you. And, you know, I did give a kind of a matter-of-fact answer to Ms. Johnson in the Housing Committee. While this is certainly a topic that comes up for discussion, something I've brought up for discussion over the years that I've been on council, I think I even once or twice introduced it into the legislative agenda process. This is, the matter of fact answer is no city council members put this forward during the legislative agenda process. So that's why it's not up for consideration right now. I don't think, personally, I don't think it's something that we should add at the 11th hour, but certainly if there's an interest moving forward, I think we will probably have to go through another legislative agenda process at the end of the year to perhaps, you know, study it and take a look at it then. But it just wasn't brought up to this point.
All right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Baker, while you're looking, we already have a foundation out there. UNC School of Government back in 2010 did a primer on inclusionary zoning where they broke down that there are 3 general categories of inclusionary zoning in North Carolina: voluntary, conditional, and mandatory. So if you're going to bring the language back to us of what is being utilized, it will also be helpful to break down what is under those 3 headers: voluntary, conditional, and/or mandatory. But like I said, UNC School of Government has already done multiple papers on it, and it's being utilized in other communities. I would like for us to be nimble enough to recognize that we have seen very quick shifts in our market and in our community needs. So as committee has proposed, as I sit on BGIR, we submitted our proposal to full council. I believe, and Mr. Baker, you correct me if I'm wrong, that this is the time where as a full council, we get to have discussions. So if there is an addition or a request to get more information, not to go back to committee, because committee we've already submitted what we want to submit, but is there room or space to add? Or we know that for the next 5 months, I believe Mr. Fenton shared with us, the committee and Ms. Raleigh, they will be meeting, but there will be a fall legislative opportunity as well. So however we need to get the information back, I believe then there might be an opportunity to not stop what we're moving forward, but as an and, not an either or, to get the information back to full council of the 3 forms of inclusionary zoning that's already been identified in North Carolina. Break those down, because we already have the information. We don't need to do a research study. We don't need to identify a group to study it. The information has already been researched and is out there. It's just a matter of pulling it.
That's an excellent point, Ms. Mayfield. To be able to level set what each segment of what the law provides will be great with that information as well, Mr. Baker. Thank you. Any other questions?
So we have 2 more items that our committee covered today. Second is the budget workshop. So just a reminder, we have our first budget workshop this week. It's on Thursday at 1:30. So our budget director, Ryan Bergman, gave an overview of our budget workshop, and that will be focused on our community capital investment plan, CIP. And we'll hear more in depth about our capital capacity, what we will need to consider to address some of the pressure points that all cities across the nation are dealing with. And the third item that we have is on governance. On governance, we had requested benchmarking data from staff for cities of comparable size to Charlotte with council manager form of government. And this is also going to be planned for discussion at our March budget workshop. So you'll get that data in March. But if you would like a copy earlier, certainly Mr. Bergman can provide that. Or Mr. Bergman, if you could just provide a copy of that benchmarking data that was provided to the committee today, to the entire council, I think that would be helpful as we prepare for March's budget workshop. And with that, I think this was the last item on our governance. So hopefully this will be the end of it. There'll be no more deja vu. Oh yeah, and then at our February 13th business meeting, you will see 2 items added to our business agenda. Number 1 is 4-year staggered terms, because that was something full council gave consensus on. And then second one was adding an 8th district without removing any at-large seats. So those 2 items will be on our February 13th council business meeting agenda. So stay on the lookout for that. But that's all we have from our committee.
Any questions or comments for the committee? Okay, so February will be February the 13th for, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think Council Member Watlington.
Okay. Yes.
Mine was just-
Councilmember Watlington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This came up the last time, and so I just wanted to verify with Mr. Jones. It didn't go to committee, but it came up during this discussion. I just wanted to hear an update. You look nervous. I wanted to hear an update on the boards and commissions piece. I know we're looking forward to coming to a vote on that one, so I just want to know where that was sitting. I know it's in the hopper.
Yeah, we have that on our agenda next. We have a backlog. But yeah, that's in our agenda for, at least for our committee, we have that on our agenda for boards and commissions.
Let me just make sure, is this the one for the virtual attendance? It ought to be on the agenda. We talked about putting it on the agenda. So with that, you remember, yes.
I do.
Is there, and I don't know what else to.
Yeah, so
where is it?
I thought, and Patrick, there's a term that you'll help me with the exception of certain boards and commissions.
Quasi-judicial.
I thought that quasi-judicial, that council could proceed with
Or
having a
advisory,
virtual option for
yeah.
everybody else.
I think there are some discussions that are going on with the administration and some of those boards and commissions to get some feedback from them as to whether they want to do it or if they've got any concerns about how to do it. That's the piece that's going on right now.
That makes sense to ask them what they might want to do.
Right.
That might be helpful. So as soon as that, but it hadn't been forgotten. Yeah, okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Ms. Alina? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to ask a clarifying question around the additional items around four-year terms and the additional district seat. When it's on the agenda for the 13th, if that's something, are we having a discussion, or is that going to require a vote? Or, like, I'm just asking for clarification. So it will be a voted?
Yes.
We will vote on the item on February 13th?
In terms of what you want in front of the public hearing, then a public hearing takes place, and then ultimately you will have a chance to set specifically, once you've heard from the public, you'll have a chance to set specifically what you'd like and how you want to go about doing it, whether it's going to be done by council, by referendum, what have you.
Okay.
It's the first of a few steps that need to occur, but there needs to be a public hearing before you actually make the final decision. But you're going to look at on the 13th what you have in front of you and what you're going to put forth at the public hearing for comment.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add, Madam Mayor, so when committee approved both of these items, it was contingent upon referendum.
Right, but you're going to reaffirm that
Right,
on the 13th.
on February 13th.
Exactly,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. And I would hope the agenda item would lay out the process, because it's very measured and
Yep,
requirements.
it's all spelled out
Yeah.
there, so the public will know in advance of coming to the hearing.
Okay. Mr. Graham? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Mayfield. Mr. Graham was next, and Ms. Mayfield following. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So on the 13th, there will be a vote, and there will be a recommendation to council whether or not we want to move forward or not, correct?
Yes, and by moving forward,
Before any of that stuff occurs.
you'll make a decision as to whether or not to set the public hearing. You can choose not to go forward on the 13th if you decide that. As a council, the
Yes.
committee's already done its work.
Yeah,
But as
so-
a council, you would, by setting the public hearing, you're going to be setting the date of the public hearing, but also.
The committee's going to do that?
No, the council's going to do that on the 13th.
Okay, so the council can vote it up or down?
Yes.
Just checking.
You'll have a committee. The way I think it will work is that there will
It sound
be
like
a recommendation from the committee
Sound like
to
it's a foregone
consider
conclusion,
this.
right?
Okay. No, no, we got along. This thing is really prescriptive, so you have a lot to do. And we'll get that prescriptive
Absolutely,
definition,
yeah.
yes. All right, Ms. Mayfield, followed by Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The only thing that I will add is, as our Madam Chair mentioned for our committee, when we're having the budget discussion in March, when you look at the benchmarks, we also, by March, you will have a full breakdown of what is the definition of part-time versus full-time. Because if you look at the benchmarks, of which is online for those that want to pull it up in today's list of meeting minutes, but we are actually asking for more clarification for the simple fact that they benchmark New York. That's the area that they identify, so you'll see some adjusted numbers, but all of that will be provided to everyone prior to us getting into the budget meeting that we'll be having in March. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
So I just wanted to clarify, the referral to the committee was to consider the recommendations of the Citizens Task Force. They did not recommend 12 seats. They recommended that we have one fewer at-large seat and 8 districts. So fuse the issue and proceed as if the citizens group had recommended 12 seats. They did not. And I'm wondering, is that also going to be the subject of a vote? Is it proposed that we vote on the district realignment as well?
I believe that you have the option, and I think what your question is, Mr. Baker, when the request for council action is developed, I think it can actually be just those 2 that we have, or you can say A will be number of seats, B will be this. So I think it can be broken down, and that maybe some guidance from the committee would be helpful on that. But I think basically it will come as a recommendation from the committee, and a separate vote can be taken on any piece or part of it, based upon what the council's doing. So I was just saying that's.
Committee has a response to the question.
I'm still asking my question, if I may. I had another for the city attorney. The new district issue, is that something that requires a referendum or anything, or is that entirely within our authority?
That is within your authority. It's part of the ability to change government structure, which you have specific statutory authority to do that in terms of adding a district.
But there is a limit on the number of seats that we're allowed
That's
to
correct.
create.
You could have up to 12 council members and a mayor. So you would be going to the maximum size that's allowed by North Carolina law.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I had Ms. Mayfield followed by Mr. Mitchell.
No, we have Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah. So Ed, to your point, and we kind of shared our feedback to you earlier in January about that. And so we got a great presentation from the chairperson. She came to our committee about their recommendation. And we deliberated, and we voted against that, and we submitting back a new proposal that you will vote on February 13th.
Okay. All right, Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So in committee, what we also recognized that we had an election mid-year last year, and out of that election, you had new members that were sworn in as of September who were not a part of the previous conversation. So those new members who are now part of the committee, when we looked at the recommendation, which it is a recommendation. Community went out, they came back with the recommendation, we then submitted, and we had this conversation with council months ago. So when it's time, this is our committee's recommendation. We all have the ability, just like with any other item that's before us, to vote it up or vote it down. Now, how it's actually broken out as individual questions, that's something that the chair and vice chair is going to work with the staff on, but there's no misleading, there's no misinterpreting, there's no miscommunication regarding what committee has submitted to full council, because we had full conversation and the caveat of stating why we are submitting to full council what we are submitting.
Got it. All right, Mr. Driggs?
So I do understand that. I'm just saying, we convened that citizens group to talk about our pay increase and some other issues in order to give the public some comfort that we were not making these decisions that affect us by ourselves. When we go outside of the recommendations of that group, that's a different action. So fine, we can do it. I'm not saying we can't, but we should not give the impression that all we're doing is acting on a recommendation from that group if we do something different from what they recommended. Thank you.
I would just put a piece of food for thought for all of my colleagues out there, which is we are in the middle of very complicated and high-stakes strategic planning for transportation. And clearly our partners in the General Assembly and a referendum is part of that strategy. And we just covered at least 3 topics in the last 15 minutes that are absolutely 100% items that they vehemently disagree with: an extension of terms, an inclusionary zoning, and in watering down a Republican vote, which, let's be quite frank, that was the committee's recommendation. It wasn't get more help and more people around here. It was better level set through more districts and less at-large people, the ability for the percentage of voters and parties to match at least more potentially the number of representatives here. So regardless of if you believe in that or not, right or wrong, if there's a majority of votes here or not, I would just ask us to contemplate the fact that the same body that we are going about asking for partnership will not view that in any way other than as a headwind towards our partnership.
I think everyone knows that really we've gone through, and now we're talking about the conversation that you will likely have on the 13th. So just be aware of that, and we'll go to the next item. Is there any other item for this, Madam Chair?
No, that's it.
All right, thank you.
The 13th, which is a committee conversation, right?
Council.
We're going to vote on the 13th?
Yes.
All right, let me make sure. All right, okay, please, and I know it's nice sometimes to have a break, but let's be clear. The committee has made a recommendation that will be on the February 13th agenda for the council's full consideration. You do not have to vote for doing it. You can vote to table it, you can ask to send it back. There are all kinds of motions that will be allowable, and they'll be voted up and down. And so I think that this is an important one, and there are lots of important issues to consider in this, because we have worked a lot to do a lot of major things, and this will be one of them for the council to act on or choose not to. All right, so is everybody ready to go to the next item? Okay. All right, the next report that we have is from Jobs and Economic Development. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Jobs and Economic Development Committee met today. Vice Chair Driggs, Ashmere, Molana, and Wallington were all there and accounted for. I'll pick off where Mr. Driggs left off relating to the transit update. We too received a transit committee update. We recognize first and foremost that the CTC is a transit project first and foremost, giving deference and respect to the end users, the riders, the bus drivers, and those that will utilize the service. And so we had a robust conversation and transportation. The economic development conversation was more about the economic development spinoffs, the Hornets Performance Center, the district opportunity, naming rights, and branding. And so our committee meeting went extremely well, where we talked about the potential of the Charlotte Hornets coexisting with the Charlotte Transportation Center. We saw some very, very preliminary sketch and drawings of the facility as it may occur, very, very preliminary. For sure, we talked about that being one of two options. There may be yet another option for a practice facility or performance center. Option B, if the facility conversation regarding CTC does not work out, and so there's another alternative site option for a practice facility. Those conversations are in the very early stages of occurring, along with design and all those type of stuff that has to occur right now to see whether or not that's something that makes sense for both the CT Center and for the Charlotte Hornets. So that's very early conversation, but we did introduce that to the committee today. In addition, we also talked about the district, creating a district, and this part of the presentation I was extremely excited about, because it does talk about a lot of economic development opportunities alongside of the investment we made last year for the renovation of Spectrum Center itself, the building of a new CTC Center with the possibility of a training facility on top of it, as well as the extending of Brevard Street to create a district center. Many cities throughout the country are going to this concept. We got an example of what they're doing in Tennessee. I believe that something of this strategy can work for our local community as well. Coupled with what's happening at the Epic Center, as well as in the immediate area of the vicinity of the Spectrum Center and the CTC. This creates a unique opportunity of high-value assets for our community. So extremely, extremely excited. We did hear from the consultant that we're working with in terms of his perspective on getting the resources necessary to fulfill the financial obligations. Again, very, very preliminary numbers. My vice chairman will take care of that for the committee. He's my finance guy. I will focus on the vision in terms of how all this thing works out. Ed and the budget director will look at how we pay for it. So I think we have a good team along with the other committee members that was really, really engaged in this. Again, we're really, really in the early stages of moving forward with preliminary engineering and design and all those things you have to do to prepare this project to happening, right? So we're very early, but I think everyone left being cautiously optimistic about the financing of it, the vision for it, the community collaboration of our uptown neighbors, working in conjunction with Center City Partners and others to kind of all work together to see how this may work for us. In addition, I had the opportunity last week to meet with the developers of the new Epic Center, and they too are excited as well in terms of how they can blend what they're trying to do to be as an extension to what we're trying to do as well. So very excited about it. A lot of great things are happening specifically related to the district itself. And then when you take a look at a higher 30,000 feet, some of the other projects that we're working on that will be complementary to the district, i.e. maybe the Silver Line, the new transit station that we're building on the other side near the stadium, maybe a potential district over there, a lot of economic development opportunities that will be existing for our uptown area. So very preliminary in terms of where we are. A lot of staff work will be going forward in earnest to develop a timeline to be determined. The main thing, and we did not cover this in the transportation report out, is the building of the new temporary facility, right? And making sure that, again, before we talk about economic impact, building a new CTC center, that the ridership and the bus drivers and the public has a temporary facility that meets their standards while this new center is being constructed. So that was part one of our committee meeting. Part two of the committee meeting was a discussion on our ARPA funding recommendations. And I thought that this portion of the meeting went extremely well as well. There are several recommendations that came forward dealing with workforce development, small business, corridors of opportunity, et cetera, to the tune of $9.1 million. We did a lot of focusing on workforce development, and we paused the meeting to make sure that all minds and hearts were clear in reference to the direction that we were headed to relating to workforce development based on the conversations that occurred at our retreat. I am satisfied that staff has heard some of the comments that were mentioned at the retreat, and they have responded to it before and now, and related to not only the investment in workforce development activities, but making sure that they have hit on a number of key points that were mentioned relating to targeting industry training and development, apprenticeship, renewed expansion, established partnership with employers, investing in innovative, proactive approach for jobs, focus on skills needed and equipping existing workers with lower wages with upskilling opportunities, enabling employees to move into new roles, scale up, and increase salary. I mean, all those things that were a major concern to many of the members last week, I think was adequately addressed in the presentation given today. And so I think we're in good shape there. In addition, we talked a little bit about small business support and developing an ecosystem strategy for that as well, with several recommendations to support the utilization of small business with the focus on diverse business as well. And so, again, a lot of work and efforts and resources developed to small businesses as a part of the presentation that they made today. And lastly, but I think more importantly, as again, the staff and this council should be proud of the work that we are doing to support our corridors of opportunity. And there's resources, $1 million to support grant programs and expand the organizational support for commercial districts in key areas throughout the city, Sugar Creek, West Boulevard, Albemarle, North Tryon, Freedom, and Wilkerson Boulevard. Really creating equitable metrics for success within quarters. Again, a lot of dollars are going that way, but more importantly, as Ms. Wallington has always mentioned, making sure that we are measuring what we're doing to make sure that we're getting the impact that we desire. And so that's a key component of not only the workforce development initiatives that were laid out today, the small business, but more importantly, also the quarters of opportunity, making sure we measure what we're doing. Lastly, and I like this concept that we're doing here with the arts and culture. There's a $700,000 investment to create permanent workspace for artists and studios, entrepreneurial studio space in these quarters of opportunity, which is really, really good. The Signs of the Times, which is a jazz band, had been really wanting to do and have space on Batesford Road to create a culture, a theme, a rhythm along the corridors. And these are resources to help them do that, as well as other artists throughout the city that want to, blow life into some of these quarters of opportunity through arts. And I think that's really great. Lastly, an investment for a mobile symphony of $200,000, I think it's good too, because we can bring arts into some of these communities, and arts and entertainment, and a traveling road show, for the lack of a better analogy. So in summation, I thought the meeting went extremely well today. I thought we dotted a lot of I's and crossed some T's and built some consensus within the committee in terms of the direction that we want to go into. There is a clear acknowledgement that there were some there were some suggestions that we're going to that Councilmember Wallington made, that I suggested, that will be embedded in some of these recommendations. We will be looking for them so that they're included. I won't belabor the point of what they are. Staff knows what they are. But more importantly, Mr. Manager, is that we begin to measure what we're doing. And there's some accountability for that within the organization, and that we measure the impact so that we can articulate clearly to our constituents in the community the return on the investment for investing in workforce development, investing in small business with an emphasis on diverse business, and a continuing investment in the quarters of opportunity relating to arts and organizational support that makes a meaningful impact. So I will pause and allow any members of the committee to jump in if they wish to expand upon other points. And
Before I recognize Mr. Driggs, Mr. Graham, is there any action from your agenda that would be on the council's agenda for consideration in the next 3 to 4 weeks?
no, I think by consensus that we encourage the staff to move forward. There was an action item taken in the Transportation Committee that we support. And so I think basically we said, staff, keep moving ahead, that we're moving in the right direction.
All right, Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Mr. Chair, I enjoy being your partner. I'm just a man, no, not just a man with a calculator, okay? I have a vision too. I think we all do. All right?
We know you had a pocket protector, Mr. Driggs. We know you had one.
I have to admit, I don't normally need one.
I won't pay attention anymore when you're kicking me under the table when we're talking about the money. Right?
I admit that's an area of special interest. So I just wanted to emphasize that, as the chairman mentioned, we'd had 2 council meetings today related to CTC, and the goal was really to get a message to the staff whether they should proceed along these general lines, looking at the structure that we heard about. We heard about a funding structure, we heard about a practice facility, about naming rights, and so if there was anybody that felt that we should not continue to investigate this, they should speak up, because otherwise the presumption is that the work on that will continue. There will be checkpoints along the way. All we're trying to do now is get toward the memorandum of understanding, which is not binding, So my feeling after both committees today was that at least the people in attendance at those meetings felt we should proceed with that. I just wanted to say for the benefit of the rest of council that that's kind of what I hope the staff was able to take away, and if anybody disagrees with that, they should speak up. I did also want to comment that I really appreciated the workforce development, the apprenticeship, that allocation of ARPA dollars. It's been a pet priority of mine that we really need to do more to get people to the point where they can pay their own rent rather than just have programs where we pay it for them or help them to pay it. I particularly like the Mobile Symphony. $200,000 is in there for a program that would offer 10 concerts, symphony concerts at different locations in a mobile thing. And I think that would be really fun in the areas in which they occur. And my last comment on the mobility thing was we are using general funds to finance a transit project. So I think it's okay because it is also an economic development project, but I would like us to think about refinancing the CIP and the COPS money when the sales tax is approved from those mobility funds, and to restore the availability in our general fund account to other purposes. But otherwise, I'm supportive for now of proceeding with this. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Johnson, followed by Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the workforce development piece. I know when I was on the committee, I was very intentional about lifting up formerly incarcerated individuals, and I had asked for information about that, and I thought we were very close to implementing that population into the Hire Charlotte. I've asked Ms. Dotson about it a couple times, and as I stated during the summit, society is very intentional about excluding that population. So we need to be as intentional about programs. So I wanted to know where we are with that. I've given statistics before and everything, so I know there's information there. So do we as a council have the will to ensure that there are programs for that group in any plan that we have in Hire Charlotte? Thank you.
Is this in response to Ms. Johnson? Oh, well, then I think that we have to have the staff, or Mr. Jones is going to be responsive to that.
Okay, so I'll take the first crack at it. So I think it was $16 million associated with ARPA for, I guess, this tranche, and I don't think all of it was allocated today. Is that right? Okay, so I believe what staff did was have some items that are, I guess, ready to at least put in front of you without allocating all the funds, which would mean there are some opportunities for what I know is going to start to pop up as we go around the table tonight. I do want to also, and Tracy helped me out, a little bit of clarity, that there is this concept of it comes out of the committee, there's a discussion amongst this group, and then we get it on a docket. So there will be a vote related to the ARPA recommendations up to this point. And I do believe the MOU will come before the council also for a vote. So while it isn't, on the 13th, committee discussion amongst the bigger group with the goal of getting it on a future agenda.
Keep it moving.
So I'm just saying that while it isn't here, Ms. Johnson, it doesn't mean that it can't be a part of this tranche because money is still available.
Please follow up.
Thank you. So I know the city used to have a program, was it called Promise or something, to work with formerly incarcerated? I mean, there was some history. There was a person, I remember watching it just as a constituent.
That is true.
Right. So, and I know that person's not at the city anymore. So it's not really reinventing the wheel, I don't think. I think there's some history there. I'd like more information about that or, thanks.
I think that you are correct. A lot of it was entry-level jobs. But even with that, there were issues, because I remember talking to a number of folks about the issues of housing and not having a place to sleep as a result of being incarcerated and some of those things that are real hurdles. But the city did have a program, and I believe that that program, it's not a program anymore, it just became kind of a place that you knew you could come and apply in certain jobs, and yeah, the communication was there. So I think checking on that would be good, but I do believe that it is something that we have worked with and should continue. All right, so I have Ms. Mayfield next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Couple of questions. One, to follow up with my colleague, Ms. Johnson. In my first term on council, we passed Ban the Box. When we passed Ban the Box, there was a commitment then, different city manager, different mayor, where the focus was not only with creating opportunities for employment for those who were formerly incarcerated, because we know that box of if you've ever been incarcerated was a barrier. So it's honestly disheartening to hear, well, we'll add it in later, because this isn't a new conversation. So if this is one of those things that keeps getting kicked down the road, then we never address it. So I definitely hear the concern of why is that not specifically highlighted in here? Because while we're talking about ARPA funds, and there are 1,500 requests out there where organizations have figured out how to spend the few ARPA dollars that we have later, that needs to be clearly identified in what is presented to us in that training. I also have a specific question either for the chair or for the manager. Who is the organization that is going to manage Hire Charlotte? Hire Charlotte is a collective of multiple organizations, but who is housing the actual tracking of, okay, the city has invested $75,000 per training at Goodwill, X at Charlotte Works, X at My Future NC. Who is tracking how much money is going to each individual in training, and then tracking them to employment to see, okay, that $75,000 investment that we made, but if you're able to identify employment, that employment is paying you $35,000, $40,000? Who is actually who is managing that? Because all of this is cute in a PowerPoint, but it doesn't say where the accountability and the responsibility of the report out to council and to community lies. So who is that organization, that business, because it should be a for-profit business, not another nonprofit. Who is that?
I'll start off, Councilmember Mayfield, with the, and to Councilmember Johnson's point about formerly incarcerated. So I guess because it's a part of our fabric, we just do it 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. We had an apprenticeship program. We brought in 50 individuals with the whole goal of those individuals being folks that had barriers to employment, many of those formerly incarcerated. So as a part of what we do as an employment center for the city, we have built that into our ecosystem. In terms of how Hire Charlotte's going to be managed, I'll leave that up to the committee. But I don't want you guys to walk away today with the thought process that there wouldn't be anything related to formerly incarcerated individuals. And if that is a priority of the council, the majority of the council, we can set aside some funds for that. We tend to get into these crosshairs sometimes when there are conversations that pop up, but not clear direction. But that's something that we want to allocate a portion of these funds to. Absolutely, we can do that.
So for clarification, if I'm hearing you correctly, Mr. Manager, so you just said that, well, we say it's part of our fabric. If it's part of our fabric, then nothing is in our fabric that's not funded. So that means that previously there was some funds that was allocated. If you just mentioned that there were 50 individuals that went through a specialized training, have all 50 of those individuals been placed in employment that's gainful employment where they're able to still live in our city?
They work for us.
Okay, so
train
we're
them.
saying the city of Charlotte hired 50 individuals.
Absolutely.
What I'm saying is separate from the city of Charlotte doing the hiring. the language, when we're talking about workforce and workplace, here's the challenge. We have partners out there right now that on paper look really good, but we have individuals that may not be those who need additional education, who may just be transitioning work. We've had a lot of layoffs in our city of high-tech jobs and other jobs. These organizations haven't necessarily been the right fit to help some of those individuals be retrained and get connected to another job that's paying them at the salary or close to the salary that they were making before. So when I ask the question of who is going to actually be the management of this, to me, it is not a good response to say, well, I'm going to leave that up to the committee. That falls in your wheelhouse as the city manager. Because if this is going to be something that council has expressed that these are our goals and our expectations, it is then the responsibility of your office to help ensure that these goals are met. They cannot be met if we don't have a designated, whether it is a for-profit, whether it is a specific department head that focuses on this. If there is not a clear financial commitment or contractual commitment to make sure that report out will be available, whether it's annually, semi-annually, then we risk the chance of having the same question, the same conversation that we're having now regarding those formerly incarcerated. Because this is not the first time that that question has been thrown in the middle of the table for council to discuss. It's not the first time that your office has heard it. It's not the first time that you've heard it. We keep going back to it because the language and or the funding and or the support or the combination of all three has not been put in place for clear enforcement. So that is my question regarding the enforcement, not the answer of, well, if that's what you want to do, then we'll just add a line item. That line item should have been added years ago. So what I'm asking is for clarification of understanding that if the conversation keeps coming back up, regardless of who the council members are around the table, if this is truly a part of the culture that Charlotte wants to create or wants to give the impression to the community that it has, where is the language and or the line item so that anyone can go and see that that commitment is not only there, but that commitment is enforceable?
So I guess you asked two questions. One is, how is Charlotte going to be managed? And that hasn't run its course in terms of having everything totally built out. So I think it's premature.
That's a valid answer. But telling me the committee will make that decision wasn't a valid answer. So I'll accept that answer that we haven't figured that part out yet.
Yeah, and then the second issue with formerly incarcerated individuals, I would say to you that clearly there's compassion, not just from the administration, but from the council. We get many items that are thrown out, and we'd like to get a little direction that 6 people would like us to go in that direction. One of the reasons why we didn't allocate all the funds, but if we'd like to have the remaining funds allocated that way, and if 6 council members said that's what we want, that's exactly what we'll do.
So
Exactly.
right, but it's not, but what I want us to clearly hear that he's saying, this isn't necessarily just we'll just allocate the money. These are our partners. We can make it very clear in our language for any contract that our partner brings to us or anything that we put out, that our expectation is to also ensure those who are formerly incarcerated have the same opportunities for these trainings and same opportunity to actually be in the room. That is not a conversation where we just throw money at it. So to say, well, I'll just allocate the balance of the money, we haven't even talked about what is the balance of the money, what other priorities do we need. This is strictly a conversation that can be supported by council saying, multiple council members saying, yes, we want to make sure that as we're working with these partners, Charlotte Works, Goodwill, CELC, whoever these partners are, Central Piedmont, they know that in order to get access to the funds that we are talking about allocating now, that pool of those that come to that table also include our residents and our neighbors who are formerly incarcerated, to give them an opportunity to become self-sufficient. It isn't necessarily throwing more money at it. The money that's already allocated should include, not exclude, or to say, well, to help these additional people, we need to put more money at it, include them in the part of the conversation from the front end, opposed to trying to figure out on the back end and then saying, well, we spent all the money because if we hadn't done this, then we would have money for that. No, include them in this conversation on the front end. The motion is to support
have to have a
Councilmember
motion.
Johnson's to add the formerly incarcerated into the higher Charlotte elevated ecosystems to create job opportunities.
We would, I know, I heard what you asked if this is a motion, and I think Ms.
No, she said, but I already asked for that earlier.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I didn't want to speak out of time.
Okay, well, I got a list of people that want to speak as well. So, but the clarification is that there is a motion. I think the real question here is that,
In committee, you said.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So what you're talking about, she said in committee today. It was actually a takeaway. But we can.
I think that Mr. Graham wanted to address this, but I have a list of people that would like to speak, and Ms. Watlington was next. Do you have anything else to
No, that
add?
was it. I'm happy to support the motion that Councilmember Mayfield just made.
Okay.
Seconded, rather.
All
I
right.
seconded it.
So we have to first have a motion. I don't, because this is an item, and this is hard for me, because I'm never quite sure when do we want the public to come in and talk and comment and understand we're making something. This has been designed as a, and actually, I'm going to ask Patrick, because most of our agendas go out and they're published so that the public will know what we're talking about. I think sometimes we move to an action item that's not there, but then sometimes we're like, well, you can't do it unless you get the public to comment on it. I'm very concerned about how we do this in a way that works. So Patrick, help me out here on motions that, we advertise this as a committee discussion.
So you don't have any of these motions on your agenda, and how these typically work is that if you're going to add something to the agenda to be discussed and voted on at this meeting, there would need to be unanimous consent to do that. That's typically how that works.
Point of order, because I have to believe that if somebody says we want to make an adjustment to a committee recommendation, we're not making a council action to adopt something as policy right now. What I understood of her motion and what I seconded is that we make an adjustment to the recommendation coming out of committee for our consideration as direction to staff to come back with a policy that we would then vote on. So I have a hard time believing that we can't ever come to any kind of understanding of how the people sitting around the dais feel without first putting it on an agenda. I'm not asking for a formal council action. Councilmember Johnson asked, is there political will? And the purpose of this strategy session is to find out what we have political will for. So I don't feel like that falls under a formal RC.
Maybe I misunderstood what Ms.
I did
Ashby,
too.
I
What
did
thought
not
was
hear.
that
I thought it was a motion. I didn't hear
we
review
can
of the
call it a
committee.
straw vote or
I
whatever
think
you wanna
that's-
call it,
That
but-
was, I think we need to be clear on what the motion is first and foremost. And then I've got a list of people that want to comment about that. And so that motion, as well as the conversation, I think it's always better to be clear on whether or not what the committee recommendation is versus what a motion would be that's presented as a result of a conversation. And if I think what we're saying, I'm going to ask Ms. Mayfield to clarify this motion as well. Ms. Mayfield?
Madam Mayor, what my motion was to add that additional language to the committee's recommendation. My challenge, of which I have a clarifying question, the way the new structure has been identified, for committees to meet and then report out. I'm not seeing where we have the opportunity to do the conversation that we're doing right now. If the expectation is only in committee do we may have our discussion, and then whatever is brought to full council is just, this is what the committee recommended without you having any input into it. If that's the expectation of a rubber stamp, where it goes from committee to council to community, that's going to be a challenge, because this was the space that I was under the impression where we get to ask the clarifying questions and add additional information.
That is
So
correct.
when I made my motion, lack of a better word, it was to add this language specifically for those formerly incarcerated in this presentation. Because if we're talking about ARPA funding, it is about being as inclusive as possible, because from what I heard, because I listened to it, I tuned in online, my colleague in committee made a motion that didn't go anywhere. Now that we're in full body to see if there is support from a number of us to add this to this discussion for a larger conversation. Now, are you saying we have to have unanimous support for us to add?
No, it was a misunderstanding. I thought you said, I'm making a motion, and it did not say to the committee wording, and I think that's what Ms. Watlington expressed.
And my apologies, because my caveat was because of the conversation that we're having right now, it is specifically about committees. When I made the motion, I made the assumption that it was specific to this language. So if I need to clarify that for the sake of the clerk, then I will do that.
Well, I think it's clarified now. Ms. Watland has said what the motion was that she made in the committee. And so the next speaker that I have, and so I think what we'd be doing is sending this back to the committee for further discussion.
That's not what I said.
And you want,
No, ma'am, that was not what I said.
so you're going to add it to the committee's discussion, or to the committee?
Can I add something right
To the
quick?
recommendations. That's why I say this
Okay, I
gets
need some help,
confusing.
Mr. Parliamentary.
So if I
need
made
some
the
help.
motion, I'm saying what my motion was. My motion was for this to be added to the recommendations, just like we have had other discussion regarding the recommendation. Because if this body,
I understand
when we
you now.
all
I
come
do.
together, if we do not get the chance to have these conversations, then again, what exactly are we doing or is it an expectation that we're just supposed to rubber stamp it? Because if it is,
Right.
then we don't need to do this.
Ms. Mayfield, I'm just trying to make sure that I hear you clearly about what the motion is and where it goes. Then what I'm trying to figure out is that if this was discussed in committee, where this would go back, because I think what you're doing is adding to the discussion. And then I'm asking Patrick if we would vote on adding it to this. What I think I hear is more discussion from the people that have asked to speak towards that. So it would be included in the discussion. Patrick, am I?
Yes, and I've got clarity as to Ms. Mayfield's. Councilmember Mayfield's question, which is to amend the committee recommendation.
Yes.
And then the full council will take up the amended committee recommendation as opposed to sending it back to the committee.
Right, but
Is that my,
let me make sure that
Yes.
I say that correctly. The council would not be voting on the action tonight. It would be on a council agenda with the full motion that would be included on it. So that's the next step. If it passes here, it goes on an agenda item for a council vote with a committee recommendation or modified to include. I think that having this discussion, we can move on to now understanding Ms. Mayfield's motion. Ms. Watlington has spoken, and now Ms. Ajmira has left the room. Mayor Pro Tem. Oh, that's right, but you've already spoken, and
I get the report.
you get to come back. I get to come back to you, though. So if you want to clarify now, Mr. Graham, Mayor Pro Tem, is that, okay, Mr. Graham?
I just want to say this, right? I get it, right? Formerly incarcerated individuals in our community should be a top priority for everybody. And I would be hard pressed to be corrected if I'm wrong, that all of our workforce development partners doesn't have an initiative that focuses on the formerly incarcerated. I will be hard pressed to believe that Charlotte Works doesn't have a pipeline where they're focusing on that we're going to give resources to. Goodwill has a focus on formerly incarcerated. CPC, through their program, have a dotted line to formerly incarcerated. So maybe it's an assumption that we just assumed that everyone kind of got that. And so it would be little effort at all for the committee to say, to tag along to all the funding that we would like to get approved, that there's a special focus and emphasis on the formerly incarcerated with these dollars. I mean, that's like 10-second conversation, right?
I wondered if they,
So I'm not
do we know
sure.
that they don't?
Huh?
Or do we know that they don't?
Well, I think we need to fact check that,
Yeah, we
Ms.
could fact-
Dotson, for sure. But, you know, I would be hard pressed to believe that they didn't. Now, if you're saying that the city of Charlotte should have its own initiative related to a program related to formerly incarcerated, I would probably say that would be redundant, because there are people in the community that's probably doing a lot better than we probably could, right?
Well,
A lot more effective, a lot more efficient. And if we want to fund those organizations, I think we can do that. I think we're having a circular argument here that I'm not sure that we can ever get off. Secondly, in reference to the management of the Irish Charlotte, it's being managed by Economic Development now, right? I mean, so if we want scorecards, or we want performances, I mean, if we want so that's where it's being managed at today, and I stand to be corrected. And I think there's an individual that's working specifically related to those initiatives that can report to the council anytime we want them to report out. So I'm just missing the boat, and maybe that's appropriate that why that picture's up there, right? Maybe maybe I'm just in the water swimming around trying to figure it out. I just don't understand what we're doing.
Okay, so Ms. Ajmira, you've missed a lot of the fun, so please join in, dive in, get in the boat.
I know we were having conversation about that to the point that Ms. Johnson had raised. I think the purpose of this meeting is to really see where consensus is. So, Mr. Jones, what do you need from us? Like, do you need show of hands? Do you need head nods? What exactly do you need in order for you to include that as part of the proposal?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Because I think we have done that with other items in the past, whether it's state and federal legislative items or transportation items. We kind of sort of gave you consensus where council is leaning towards.
No, thank you, Councilmember Ajmira. And I don't disagree with what was mentioned earlier about the purpose of this meeting. So it isn't rubber stamping, it is having these concepts and ideas come out. And so let's just use a very different thing so that it's not as, it's relevant, but let me, so there have been times when a council member of two may have thrown something on the table for a good discussion, but at the end of it, there's not the majority of council that wants to do it. So whether it's a head nod or whatever the right thing is, it would be great to have that type of consensus from council to say that we'd like this to be a priority as we start to think about workforce development going forward.
Yeah, I think that, so this topic needs to be revisited so that you can, so you have clear message from the majority of the council as to where they are leaning. So that's one item, and we can do that. We can do that. I just want to comment on a separate item, and I had shared that with Ms. Dodson earlier today and a couple of times before, as well as Chairman Graham. When we released our first tranche of ARPA dollars, there were concerns around equity, especially when it came to business partners support program. And I had highlighted that at our last committee meeting, and I think during our one-on-one meeting, where we needed to ensure that the minority chambers were included in that distribution, and that distribution was done in a way that aligns with our equity and governance framework, and it's an equitable process. And a lot of the minority chambers were left out of that funding. So I know that we still have some ARPA dollars left, and I would like us to prioritize some of these minority chambers who have worked tremendously, and these are all volunteer-run organizations that have supported businesses, whether it's Latin American Chamber of Commerce, Asian American Chamber of Commerce, Black Chamber of Commerce, and so on, is to ensure that they are, with this distribution, that they are getting their fair share, and then the whole process is equitable, and we are using equity lens. So,
All right.
if we can get some sort of feedback on that, I know that Ms. Eskridge was working on it with Ms. Dodson, but it's been a while. We haven't received any update on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. Before I talk about the arts and culture slide, I'll just continue my comment on this section of the conversation. This is something I said during, I'll probably bring up during our house, the next section, the next committee presentation. I think what the difficulty with our retreat last Monday and Tuesday is that we weren't able to give clear affirmation to what our priorities met. I thank Mr. Bakari for making the motion so that we can kind of get past that. But I don't think we were ever able to have an effective conversation as a council to give staff some of that clear guidance, right? I think what Mr. Graham said it in his assumption. I think Ms. Mayfield is correct that we shouldn't operate under assumptions. We have to be clear. But I think we need to figure out as a council how to have a structured conversation where we do that very simply, right? Year after year, we are expected to affirm, hey, where do we want staff to focus our workforce development efforts, so that it is a common thread through the entire DNA of the way they're looking at recommendations through the year. So I am certainly, I would like to personally prioritize formerly incarcerated people. I've said that over the years. I've worked on that, but I also would like to get it to a clear kind of guidance to staff of not only for formerly incarcerated folks, but where do our kind of top 3, top 5 kind of priorities lie. I think this is something that we did well, for instance, during the pandemic when we first got that, was it CARES Act money, right? Where we said, hey, we wanted to focus on restaurant and hospitality workers, getting them retooled. We wanted to focus on people whose industries were kind of wiped out because of the pandemic to get them retooled. We have to give staff that type of guidance so that we are not acting under assumptions, but our values are being represented in our policies. And I think if we could find a way to do that, I think that is a committee question to define, since we weren't able to do it at our retreat this year. But I think that's going to be a common thread through our many different policy areas. So I don't think it's something that we can just do, or we should just do for one group, but we should kind of define that some way, somehow. With that said, I did want to just kind of call out slide 16 of the presentation on these ARPA dollars. Just wanted to give, I brought this up during the committee meeting, but this is kind of what I meant as it relates to looking at arts investment from the public sector through an economic development lens. You know, we're looking at investing in infrastructure, stages, as well as finding ways to support workspaces so folks can work and build businesses. And then while it doesn't have a dollar amount, we're looking how that we can integrate artists and art within, again, our policy development lenses throughout the city. So I would just like to point out why this is an important kind of conclusion we need to come to as it relates to, again, guidance to our priorities for staff as it relates to arts and culture, why this is an economic development thing, and why this is should be a city council priority. I mean, this conversation about supporting formally and justice-involved individuals is important because this is ARPA dollars, this is one-time dollars, but the intent is to get this year to year and to create some kind of framework where future councils can reprioritize how we want that money to be focused so that they can work throughout the year on making effective recommendations that fit our expected outcome expectations. And frankly, this is the way city council is supposed to work. So I think we all have to kind of, or should, take a step back and figure out how we really refocus our energies in these last few months to be effective policy-making boards and work through those policies and by those policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Molina. I'm sorry. Do you want me to go to someone else?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, we've covered a lot. I just want to go back to the discussions that we had in committee, because I specifically remember Councilwoman Watlington bringing up, she actually said as a takeaway, and I think we all agreed with her. So basically what we discussed, and I know that we're now in front of the full council, but I just want to ensure, you know, to my colleagues that that was actually a piece of the discussion that we had today. Councilwoman Watlington, she injected that into the conversation, and she also added single mothers, because there's a large amount of quantitative data in our particular city that speaks to poverty being sexist, right? So we have an overwhelmingly large percentage of women who are affected by need in our population. So adjacent to this, to our formerly incarcerated community, she also injected into the conversation single mothers as well. And I wrote down some of the takeaways that as the committee we provided to the staff, which was pipeline development, which would also include some of what we're talking about. What would the pipeline look like with Hire Charlotte? What methods of connection will we use? How do we do it? Because we're still, like our chairman said today, we're still talking about the how. So I don't know at what point we will have injection from the full council, but we did mention that, you know, the how is still being hashed out, and that was one of the takeaways that a few of the council members actually mentioned. The impact on economic mobility, our target audience. We even actually said, do you remember that, Chairman and Vice Chairman? We were actually talking about, you know, I think we do have areas of opportunity to decide what the target audience will be for Hire. And I don't disagree with my colleagues in saying that are formerly incarcerated. I want to iterate that and be clear. I'm not saying that I'm disagreeing. I'm really just kind of, were brought up. And, you know, we talked about success models and what they look like, because I feel like a lot of what we would do with something like this is look at what's been successful and then hopefully build on that so that we can be, you know, more inclusive as the project, you know, goes along. And one thing that I was encouraged by was that Tracy, our economic development head, she actually said that hire was designed to be scalable. So in order to create a project and make it scalable, you first have to find out what works and what doesn't. And so we have a scalable model where we can actually, create, different work streams and different ways to impact our community. So I feel encouraged by the workforce development piece. And I want to speak personally, as a person who changed careers in my 30s and retooled and tried to get work, I had a hard time. I was trained and I have a lot of education. And so I do realize personally that we've had areas of opportunity with connection and employment and things of that nature. So, I think a lot of us bring a lot of informed experience and passion and things of that nature that we're going to add to and take away from. And, that's why I kept kind of saying that, I remember that, Councilwoman Watlington injected that into the conversation. So I want to ensure my colleague, because I felt her passion from across the room, that, we did mention it in committee. And, it was actually a piece of the discussion. Actually, when the chairman and the vice chairman was saying, we were saying we were giving staff the okay to go forward with it and continue with the work. Councilwoman Watlington actually injected. She was like, I'm okay with it as long as we consider what I've said as a takeaway, so, I felt encouraged by that because she brought that up specifically in the meeting. So I just wanted to provide that as a piece of feedback and assure you that I don't know what the will of, the body is to, do anything additional right now, but we did discuss it in committee.
All right, Mr. Bakari?
I just say quickly, I think that when we have topics that are deep, that have a lot of moving parts and pieces to them, it would behoove anyone who cares about how they want to be shaped to get into the weeds of how they work first. We can't sit around here at a high strategic level and think we can navigate to outcomes when we don't understand how the cake is baked. So 2 points for this conversation, just so you guys are aware. There are 2 parts to hire in this capacity. On one side, there's the training programs, all the parties you've seen before. I will absolutely guarantee you, not only do they all have a focus and care about single mothers, about formerly incarcerated, aside from that as a priority, it doesn't matter. It's not like there's a different kind of program to teach them to code or ultimately a trade skill if you're formerly incarcerated or not. It's a program to upskill you. So there's nowhere you'd go spend your money to make that program different. And then on the other side of the coin, what really matters is the workforce partners, the hiring companies who are providing the jobs, the most important thing to those folks. And I'll promise you 2 things right now. Every company in this town of any magnitude has a D&I officer. And the D&I officer focuses on this every day far more than what you're thinking about right now. So those are the folks that ultimately are going and saying, can we push the envelope on more female hires or single mother hires or all those things? And trust me, they are measured every day to meeting those goals. And there are certain things like formerly incarcerated where, for example, if you're any of the banks here, it's out of your control. The regulators at a federal level right now do not allow you to hire certain people with certain things on their record, and that's the way it works. So again, I appreciate the passion for the items, but if you learn what is actually happening in the programs, you'll realize very quickly this is a completely irrelevant conversation we're having. Like it does not matter because you wouldn't change the things that you train people to or the jobs that are there that are being provided. So again, got to ramp up on the program.
Okay, so let me tell you what I have so far. Wait, I just want to say that what we're talking about is the committee's work that's going to come back to you on a future agenda. And then what I have is first in our programs to be sure that any program that includes chambers includes the minority chambers. I have that we would have a policy about those that have been in the justice system that would, if as we contract or work with groups that are doing this workforce, that they would be including those that are formerly in the justice system, but we would also ask them to describe how they do it now. And then we would also include single mothers, that we would look at, the committee has talked about some of the administrative things that Ms. Molina said, there's still a pipeline to be developed. There's still connections on how to get people into the space that they can have for the training. And then the metrics of beginning to actually measure what the targets are for people to be successful as we move through this. And then the final thing that I had is the workforce development programs, that was submitting their programs that they would use to address single moms or single mothers and those that have been in the justice system. So with that, I know that the committee has given their overall report. So when they would, I'm sorry, may I finish a minute? All right, by the Roberts rules, everyone has spoken that wanted to be recognized, except Mr. Mitchell. So I'm just making sure we know what we're including right now. So those would be the things that you could have in the request for council action, address these issues specifically as the staff returns the information for the council.
Point of order, Mayor, is there a motion on the table? There's a motion on the floor.
There is a motion on the table. I'm just clarifying, the motion is to include the formerly justice system clients to be included in the policies on the contracts that we are talking about today, that will be on a council agenda. Does that answer your question?
Well, there was just a lot of discussion outside of the
Well,
motion
that's
that
why I'm
usually
trying
is
to
not
outline.
allowed to happen.
That's why I'm trying to outline the points that would be included when council comes back to vote on these items.
We didn't talk about, single parents wasn't in the motion.
Well,
The
I'm
motion
putting
was
on-
very, very specific about formerly incarcerated.
I think that what I was saying is that the staff would give information on the single parents. They could just say, the committee did not discuss, or the committee can discuss. It's just getting every item that was raised as an issue addressed before we have the actual vote on the programs and the motion. Okay,
No.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm waiting
I
to
know.
talk, and then he.
I think we've already, that's what I understand. I'm just clarifying. All right, so the last thing that I had is that Ms. Johnson has raised the question of single mothers, and that could be addressed. I think you said it wasn't included. I know, that's what you were bringing up. So the staff would have that ability to say that. So now, Mr. Mitchell has not spoken. I will recognize Mr. Mitchell.
I'm going to try to be brief. So let me do a follow-up to Councilmember Watlington when she said, how do we measure what programs are successful? So can I get some information, because Hire Charlotte is new to me. So it would be helpful if you can share the results of Hire Charlotte, particularly how many have we placed, who's our target audience, and what level, what salary of those jobs were they able to attain. And so, Councilmember Bakar, I would say I have a different perspective in workforce development. So let me share you mine. I work for 2 construction companies, and our primary focus were those who either were incarcerated or those who never had a job before and lived in some of our challenged communities. And so we took about 70 through a training program with the companies in construction. They trained them skills, then put them on the convention center and the airport. And for me, in my early conversation I mentioned at the annual strategy meeting, it's the Chatty report. And I want to take us back, make sure I'm saying that right, Mayor. It's the Chatty report. And so my vision of a workforce development is nothing against Hire Charlotte, but it's a different audience we need to reach, we need to train, and we need to put on the payroll as Councilmember Driggs articulated. And so, for me, that is the market or the citizens that we have yet to spend time with. So let me give you an example. Councilmember Molina and I are working on a project, so I'll let her talk more about it. But it's really about workforce development. We're going into a community with partners, with appliance and a construction company to give the 18 to 24-year-old who are flunking out of high school skills in construction and HVAC so they can be productive citizens in our community. I don't think that's an audience for Hire Charlotte. So I've always said there is a and possibility, not an or. I do think, Mayor and Council, you know, this conversation, I think we all got the right intentions. We're trying to employ people in Charlotte. I think the difference for me has always been Hire Charlotte is about the jobs that are out there need to be filled. My definition of workforce development is the person in Charlotte that I need to give job skills so they can get an entry-level job. And so when you think about those two different dynamics, you got different people going to play in the Hire Charlotte space, which is great. The fintechs, computers, the finance analysts. Then you got those who Dante and I grew up in Brook Hill and Southside. It's all about how can you train me to have the right attitude, get the right skills so I can get an entry-level job in the city of Charlotte. I think those are two different dynamics, and I want us to be inclusive for all of us. And so I could talk about really from the construction, we are very friendly to those who have been incarcerated. We're giving them a second chance in life. You mentioned, to your point, if you've been incarcerated, you can't get a job as a financial planner or deal with finance in a bank, correct? But all of our citizens who wants to work and say, give me a chance to give me an opportunity, we should have a program to encourage them and get them skill set. So that's the only difference I see when we talk about, in my mind, really workforce development. Go where our normal companies, Fortune 500, don't go. Go where the construction companies say, I take that young man, he might not make it at Garinger High School, but I tell you, if I can teach him a trade, he can start working making $18 an hour at the airport in construction. Okay. Okay.
I have 6 to 7 points here that the manager has also been inscribing that will go back. This will come back to council with the information as requested, addressing the issues the council requested, and also including the recommendation for the motion that Ms. Mayfield made.
So are we addressing the motion right now? Or are you trying to lump all of that?
No, I'm not
capture
trying to lump it
together?
right now. I want to get that added, that's, if it's to be added to the motion, to the
My motion was
recommendation.
clear.
Yeah.
Right.
That's, so I just want, just for, my apologies, just for clarification, Mayor, you captured a lot, which is great. I just want to make sure that what we recognize is separate conversation. There was a motion, there was a second on that motion. My motion was only to add the language of formerly incarcerated into this. That's it.
Contracts.
That's
we
it.
would have. Yes, that's what I had, adding the incarcerated policy into our contracts. I'm sorry, what did you say?
She said she made a motion to what I had discussed. I said hire Charlotte. I said hire Charlotte. The biggest concern for me is this was already in hire Charlotte. When I was on the committee, when I was changed committees for the new term, I asked Councilmember Watlington to make sure you keep this lifted. I'm trying to look for previous presentations where we addressed this. So that's the bigger issue, the governance that, like Councilmember Mayfield said, you know, the ban the box. We've got to keep this lifted. And I also want to address a text that I received from Kenny Robinson about the partners in the community that are not addressing specifically formerly incarcerated. My point is, in all due respect, I've been a single parent. There's no one that will legally discriminate against someone because they're a single parent. But if you're formerly incarcerated, an employer can say, I'm in the banking arena, we can't hire you. So as intentional as people exclude them there needs to be policies to be intentional about including them.
And I think that's what Ms. Mayfield's motion is doing.
Exactly. So that's
what
the
we're going to
motion on the
vote
floor.
on now.
Yes.
That's going to be voted on. All in favor of that motion, please raise your hands. Okay. So that motion is added to the agenda. Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, now,
So
let's-
just for clarification, it's added to the agenda, or it's added, we're asking for that population to be included in the Higher Charlotte program?
I thought that that was the motion.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm just making sure. Well, you said
To
the
be
agenda.
included in the Higher Charlotte program. Okay. All right.
I'd like to make a motion. I know I talked to some of you about using equity in governance framework and ensuring that minority chambers do get their fair distribution from the ARPA dollars. So I would like to make sure in the ARPA distribution, they are included. There is a specific bucket just for minority chambers to apply to. So I would like to add that to the, I would like to make a motion to add that.
We have a motion and a second. To add that, I'm going to ask the manager to address that. It's,
I think you just call for the vote.
okay. All right, any other discussion?
Adding something to an agenda, is that the motion? What exactly?
No, what we're doing is giving direction on the setting aside for the minority chambers an amount of any ARPA funding that we can,
Isn't this a budget conversation?
well, it is a motion.
We're talking about appropriating dollars right now.
Well, we are discussing ARPA dollars. Committee just need a report out on ARPA dollars from the committee. So I'm just adding, this was not included as part of the recommendation, which I've been advocating for a while. And now I would like to just make a formal motion.
And the motion would be that if it's ARPA money funded, it would be allocated among the minority chambers, and they would have a separate allocation.
Yes.
For how much?
Well, it would be, as the manager's going to be bringing these back, we'll know that because you're giving him policy guidance now. So with that, all in favor of the motion, do we have a second? I want to make sure I get a second. And a second. So all in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Okay, 2 opposed. Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to our next item, or next. Yes.
I wanted to, if I can ask Billy for a count for the last vote regarding the formerly incarcerated being added to the,
I had a unanimous vote.
I wanted to know what the counts were. Did you get that?
Yes, it was unanimous for the first one. The second one was not for the one that we just
You didn't
took.
raise your hand?
You can raise your hand.
Well, thank you.
does.
'cause
Could you change my vote to a hard no, please?
You,
Thanks.
wait a minute. There are rules about changing votes, too. Let's not jump in here and do
I
this.
think we addressed that this was not a real vote or a real thing. Is that correct, Mr. Baker?
It's a straw vote.
Okay.
So
All right,
straw
our
me,
next
a
one,
no.
our next agenda item is from the Housing Committee. All right? Ms. Watlington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Today, in the Housing, Safety, and Community Committee meeting, we had a rousing discussion about developer fees, and staff brought a recommendation back based on the last feedback from the committee in regards to what we could do to reimburse or offset some costs for developers in an effort to try to reduce the upfront cost of housing. In the hopes that that would then obviously create some new pathways for additional affordable housing. That was voted out of committee today. So definitely would like to hear feedback from the committee. Unfortunately, I cannot get into my iPad, so I can't read to you specifically what those,
Does anybody have that specifically on the staff? The specific? Well, we're talking about what their recommendation is. Thank you. Okay. If someone could read it
Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Mayfield?
Ms. Wallington, let me give this to my chair, please.
Okay, so this is on development fees that were addressed and discussed this afternoon.
Yeah, so.
All right?
All right, so when you're talking about developer fees, there are some things that we had asked to be done, and so it's really a reimbursement.
Excuse me.
Mr. Driggs and Mr. Baker, would you step out for your discussion, please? Thank you. Okay.
Yep, so it's a reimbursement pilot program, and staff had actually reached out to not only council members in the committee, but also to developers in the community, and they received a list of ideas and recommendations that came from the developers as far as what would help look like. So some of it was funding related, a new property tax incentive tool for mixed income type multifamily projects, and also funding for subordinate debt or bridge lending whenever there are private or philanthropic partnership opportunities. So that was one bucket. The second bucket was about process and time gaps, and we want to try to improve the process as it relates to getting through permitting. So offer concierge service to all projects that include affordable units, so essentially creating a preferred tier for, I'm sorry, were you looking for? Oh. Dedicated rezoning and queue prioritization for projects that include affordable units, because we know that oftentimes because of our long queue in rezoning, there's increased and significant carrying cost for developers, which then impacts the project financials and limits the ability to provide more affordable units. Add capacity for rezoning cases each month to try to get at that, eliminating that queue. More clarity and predictability around the process. And on for sale products for non-financial tools, broaden the definition of affordable to match House Charlotte parameters. So that will match up with the UDO development incentives. And then thirdly, there are some things that we will need state level advocacy for, so that we can get the permissions necessary to do these things. And there are 4 under this heading, and it's amend the definition of affordable housing in state law, because right now it's 20 to 60%, and that they feel that that is too restrictive because they're not meeting the qualifications for providing affordable housing outside of those parameters. Expand eligibility for the Homestead Act, which we know is something that we have all taken up. Establish state low-income housing tax credit program, and address challenges with the state building code for commercial to residential conversion, because there are some inconsistencies there. And obviously, with the commercial being a little more stringent when you're going from one to the other, they'd like to improve that process. So when it comes to the program recommendation, essentially from staff, we're talking about allocating up to $1.5 million of the ARPA funds for this pilot program. There was some discussion around whether or not that was the right number, if that was enough. We estimate that out of that 1.5, we could do 3 to 4 of these projects at that funding level, and that was based on staff's assessment of what has been done for projects of these target projects. We would provide periodic updates to City Council. Obviously, we'd receive them at the committee level to see how the pilot program's going, and we bring that back to the full council for review. And then at the conclusion of 1 year time, after the full allocation of evaluate after 1 year or at time of full allocation of pilot funding, whichever is earlier. So the intent here is exactly like we've been discussing, is measurement and metrics and performance management. So we can see, did this move the needle? Did we get the 3 to 4 projects? What did we learn? And do we need to make any adjustments here? So that was the recommendation that came from staff, and it was approved in the committee 4-1. So that was the developer fees. I did want to mention that we had one minority opinion that they'd like to see us do something a little bit more strategic, and that is not subsidy-based, if you will. And so certainly, we're always open to understanding how we can provide other tools.
Does anyone want to guess who that was?
Hush.
All right, is there
I'm not
any-
atting you right now. No, just kidding. No, there's 2 more items. So the Housing and Job Summit, as you all know, we did, and so we just talked about some of the follow-up that comes from that. And so we covered our key areas of focus in 2023, and there are 11. Housing Trust Fund tune-up, cost of regulation and its impact on affordable housing, economic mobility for residents and city-supported housing. I felt like that went nicely with the $600,000 pilot that the ED committee discussed today about how do we put together jobs and housing. Landlord acceptance of rental subsidies and expanding that. corporate buyers and landlords, providing an education program from the city, not necessarily an advocacy program, but an education toolkit, if you will, to HOAs so that they can understand what their potential opportunities are and what other HOAs in North Carolina are already doing. And as I understand it, there's already significant, about 40 or so HOAs that have signed up for that workshop for this week. Innovative public-private sector funding models like team force housing, affordable housing incentives that do not require upfront capital investments, home ownership opportunities. We all saw last week the announcement that we had some updates to our down payment assistance program and a couple of others. Leverage city-owned land for affordable housing. We've talked about that one for quite some time. Anti-displacement strategies. NEST is still working. We look forward to those recommendations coming back ahead of the UDO effective date. And then finally, supporting the United Way-led A Home for All program as well. We also talked about Brook Hill. Staff has been still in contact and in conversation with the development team over there, and so we know that they've asked for a little bit of assistance because unfortunately they were not able to get the housing choice voucher approval, and so they are trying to work on that. So to the extent that we as individual council members can help support for that, they would absolutely appreciate that, but we're still looking to see. They have not made a specific ask yet, but we're waiting to see what they may need. And then finally, we did talk about the Three Sisters Market, who has made tremendous strides in their work in terms of getting their full board on, getting their business plan updated, and they've been able to secure funding to hire their market manager, which will be their full-time staffer. And so we have a $1.5 million earmark right now, and so staff is feeling confident that in the near future, they'll come back with a couple of, I'll call point list items or follow-up items that will put us in a position to then vote on whether or not we can release that earmark. So feeling pretty good about it. That concludes my report,
Thank you.
unless my council members, my committee members or vice chair had anything
Any
to add.
comments from the committee members? Okay, any comments or questions for the committee? Ms. Mayor Pro Tem.
Again, part of the discussion and when it came to how we look at the Housing Trust Fund moving forward, I think council as a whole, and maybe through the work of the committee, can really be helpful to staff. Maybe not for this RFP that's going to be due in February, but for moving forward, if we do have any changes in priorities about how, what are the outcomes that we want to see with our Housing Trust Fund dollars. I would remind council, for those that were present, when we went from $15 to $50 million, that we went through a policy exercise where we really didn't have a priority kind of outlook before that. We were challenged by the community, and we challenged ourselves to do that. And we have created a framework where we were able to add, and for instance, when we added the NOAA policy to it, when we retooled it, I think it was June of last year, we are heading into, we're in the midst of a different economic environment, and we may want to give staff, again, some pretty clear guidance of what our expectations are and our priorities are. I personally think it's more than a retool because of how different the environment is, but I think that should be something that we decide as a council through working with the committee. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the things that I brought up to staff in the meeting that I want to just share with all of my colleagues is when we're looking at our Housing Trust Fund tune-up, I wanted staff to have the flexibility to think about eco-villages and or co-housing, which is a model that's not new, but they are happening across not only North Carolina, but across the nation, where you're looking at utilizing and capitalizing on our CAP and green building and development. That's housing that's built with a very different sustainable model that has both rental as well as ownership ability into it. So wanting to make sure that North Carolina doesn't have any language that opposes and/or necessarily supports, so it's still for some a new environment, but there are at least 6 communities across North Carolina that have effectively been able to create an eco-village / co-housing successfully through local policy language and zoning. So I wanted to just put that out there in this space so that we all at least have it on our radar, that we might have the opportunity to have a very different type of affordable housing development in Durden. I can send the information, but there is a community that actually used their trust fund dollars to help use some of their local government dollars to help with the development of a green eco-village. And that there's a report, it's been out there for a while. Planet Green is one of the developers, so I just wanted to put that out there for us to start thinking about how we can look at supporting our environmental goals, also through our housing goals. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right. Any other comments? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I just wanted to share what Sean Heath told us about an event tomorrow. There is a homeowners association awareness training or something. And I don't have the time. I didn't have the details, but I did want to say that it started back in July. Sean met with a small group of folks, primarily from District 4. It was Tony Mingo, Claudia Charles, Dr. Johnson at UNCC, and George Doyle, who's a real estate attorney. He lives in another district. And we talked about how how the city could help combat the corporate buying and what could be done. And one of the things that's come out of that, and we only met twice, and Sean got right on it, Marcus, so thank you so much. He does a great job. But anyway, there's going to be an education about how homeowner associations can strengthen their bylaws and maybe limit corporate buyers, or maybe add some language, to limit the rentals in the neighborhood. So there's going to be some training tomorrow, and I apologize, I don't have the details, and I don't know if anyone here does, but he said it's going to be on the city's website, so look out for that, but it's going to be recorded, and so folks can watch it on demand. So I'm excited about that, and that's one of the things that was mentioned in the committee meeting today. So, thanks.
Okay, any other questions regarding this? So thank you very much for the committee reports. That is all that I have on our agenda for this evening. So with that, we have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. What's left of it?
Preguntas sobre esto.
Very much for the committee.
Gracias por